It was 5 days after a surgeon sliced through the muscle of my lower back when my husband, Todd, stood in our bedroom doorway and changed everything. I was still wearing a bulky medical brace, struggling to prop myself up against the pillows, when he looked at me with complete indifference. "This Saturday, 12 members of my family are moving into our house for 2 weeks, he said, his voice as flat as a weather report. "Make sure you have everything ready." I actually let out a dry laugh, desperately hoping it was some sort of twisted joke, but his face remained completely blank. That was the exact second I realized a massive shift had occurred in my marriage, and I had been completely left in the dark. My doctor had been incredibly clear that I needed a minimum of 4 weeks of absolute rest with no lifting, no standing, and no stairs. I pleaded with Todd, keeping my voice quiet and measured, asking if we could please postpone the family visit even by just a few days so I could heal. He did not even bother to look up from his phone screen as he replied, stating that no one was going to wait and I just needed to do as he said. That cold response did not break my heart. Instead, it curdled deep in my stomach. After 22 years of marriage, Todd had never spoken to me with such absolute dismissiveness, treating me like an underperforming employee rather than his wife. I did not argue right then, because I have always been the type of person who needs to process things quietly before reacting. I simply nodded, and he walked away, already texting his mother to finalize their arrival plans. That night, as Todd slept soundly beside me, I lay awake staring at the shadow of the ceiling fan spinning slowly in the dim light. My spine throbbed with a deep, structural ache that reminded me of my physical vulnerability, forcing me to reflect on the last 2 decades. Every single summer, Todd's massive family descended upon our home like a demanding, unstoppable army. His parents, Arthur and Beatrice, who had been married for half a century, held loud opinions on how I ran my kitchen and seasoned my food. His brother Scott loved to proclaim after a few beers that our house was the family home, completely erasing my presence. Scott's wife, their chaotic teenagers, and Todd's younger sister with her toddler made up the rest of the 12. For over 2 decades, I had quietly managed the grueling logistics of this annual invasion without a single word of complaint or appreciation. I bought mountain ranges of groceries to satisfy everyone's dietary restrictions, prepped the guest beds, blew up air mattresses, and ran an endless cycle of laundry. I was always the one running back to the kitchen, forever standing on the periphery of their family photos. Not once in 22 years had a single person asked if I was tired or if the timing worked for my schedule. It always worked because I forced it to work, bending like water to accommodate their comfort at the expense of my own. I thought about our daughter, Haley, who was away at college, completely unaware of the silent exhaustion breaking her mother down. While in the hospital recovery room, I had promised myself that this major spinal surgery would finally be my reason to slow down and protect my body. Yet here I was, facing the prospect of hosting a small army while barely being able to stand. I reached past my pain medication, pulled my laptop onto my lap, and opened the digital folder containing our home deed. The physical deed was locked in a fireproof box in the closet, a gift my father had given me years ago to protect against life's unpredictable disasters. I had not looked at the paperwork in years, but in the quiet of the night, I carried my laptop into the bathroom. Sitting on the closed toilet seat to ease my aching back, I began to read the documents. My parents had purchased this house in the mid-90s, and it was the very home where I had grown up as a child. When my father passed away, followed shortly by my mother, the property was left entirely to me, and only me. Todd had been sitting right next to me at the lawyer's office back then, but he had been too distracted by his phone to notice the details. In Todd's mind, our transition into my childhood home meant the property had magically dissolved into communal marital property that he was entitled to control. But there it was in black and white, legally stamped by a notary. I was the sole owner. A strange, powerful clarity washed over me in that cold bathroom, replacing my panic with a quiet sense of resolve. First thing the next morning, I called Julia Vance, the trusted estate attorney who had handled my parents' wills years ago. I explained the situation to her in detail, from the severity of my spinal surgery to Todd's flat refusal to postpone his family's massive arrival. Julia listened intently before reminding me that legally, I held absolute authority over my property and who stayed there. She explained that I did not need Todd's permission or co-signature to make decisions regarding my own home, and that setting boundaries was not cruel. I wrote her words down on a sticky note. Setting boundaries is not cruelty, and stuck it directly to my laptop. We spent the next 20 minutes mapping out a clean legal plan that left no room for arguments. I was not seeking revenge or acting out of malice. I was simply a terrified, healing woman who knew her physical limits. I looked out at the backyard, realizing I could not carry a laundry basket, let alone cook 3 meals a day for 12 people. I opened a blank document on my computer and began drafting a highly organized plan to reclaim my sanctuary. By Thursday afternoon, I had scheduled 3 crucial phone calls from the quiet safety of my car, parked miles away at a local pharmacy. I needed to finalize my arrangements before Todd could use his usual manipulation tactics to wear me down and dismiss my concerns. My first call was to a local home restoration company to schedule a massive interior painting and floor refinishing project. I told the coordinator that I needed the entire main level prepped, painted, and sealed, a project that would require 2 full weeks to complete. My second call was to an HVAC specialist to pull apart and overhaul our rattling air conditioning system. The third call was to a company that strictly enforced a zero-occupancy safety clause during active chemical ventilation. All 3 professional crews were officially locked in to arrive at my house on Saturday morning between 8 and 9 o'clock. Furthermore, my medical insurance had already approved a temporary stay for me at a specialized, single-level rehabilitation apartment nearby. Todd had never bothered to ask how I would survive the week, so I saw no reason to share my plans. On Friday evening, while Todd was out finalizing dinner plans with his brother, I slowly packed my bags, my back brace creaking with every movement. I gathered my clothes, my medications, my laptop, and a framed photograph of my late parents. On the kitchen counter, I left a brief, factual note explaining that the house was closed for scheduled renovations. I drove myself to the quiet rehabilitation apartment that night, settled into the specialized bed, and slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Saturday morning, my driveway became the stage for a massive family crisis, which I later reconstructed from the furious voicemails left on my phone. 3 packed SUVs arrived, carrying 12 eager relatives loaded down with luggage and coolers. Instead of an open door, they were greeted by bright, laminated signs taped to the front entrance declaring the property closed for hazardous renovations. Through the front windows, they could see workers in protective gear draping plastic sheets over the furniture and sanding the floors. The chemical scent of industrial primer was already wafting heavily through the screen doors. The project foreman politely but firmly informed a stunned Todd that the property was legally under an active contract, prohibiting anyone from entering. Todd called my phone 4 times in a row, and when I finally answered, his voice was laced with sheer disbelief and anger. He demanded to know what I had done, completely ignoring my physical recovery. I kept my voice entirely calm as I explained that I was simply following my doctor's orders and recovering from major surgery. I reminded him that I had warned him 5 days ago that I could not host his family, but he had chosen to ignore me. He spat back that his parents were stranded on the porch before slamming the phone down. Next came a call from his mother, Beatrice, whose voice trembled with absolute fury as she accused me of being incredibly selfish. I did not waste my energy arguing with her. Instead, I simply texted her a photo of my official medical discharge papers and restrictions. I turned my phone face down, refusing to let their manufactured outrage disrupt my healing process. Todd was suddenly forced to manage the massive logistical nightmare of finding accommodations for 12 people on a busy summer weekend. He ended up booking multiple rooms at an expensive hotel near the highway, costing him nearly $4,000 out of pocket. For the first time, he had to deal with the endless complaints, dietary demands, and chaotic schedules. While Todd was drowning in the demands of his family, I spent my days in the quiet apartment doing my physical therapy exercises. I read my books, took short walks, and watched the gold afternoon light filter through the window without any noise or interruptions. I was finally choosing not to disappear, realizing that my worth was not tied to my labor. By the middle of the second week, Todd's angry text messages began to lose their sharp edge, replaced by pure, exhausted defeat. He messaged me late at night, complaining about his mother's endless demands and his father's refusal to cooperate with dinner plans. He was finally experiencing the exact invisible weight I had carried for 22 long years. When Todd called me on the 10th day, his voice was completely hollowed out by the sheer exhaustion of catering to his family's whims. He admitted that he had never realized how much work went into these visits because I had always just handled everything. I did not offer him comfort. I simply let the heavy silence hang between us. That afternoon, I opened a digital spreadsheet I had quietly kept for over 15 years to track our household expenses and summer hosting costs. I added up every grocery bill, the utility spikes, the replaced air mattresses, and the plane tickets we had bought for his parents. The final number staring back at me from the screen was a staggering $185,412. Armed with this undeniable evidence, I printed out 12 identical folders containing the detailed financial breakdown of their decades of free lodging. On the final day of their trip, I drove back to our newly renovated, sparkling clean house to meet the family. They were gathered in the living room, looking tired, frustrated, and clearly expecting an apology from me. Instead of apologizing, I walked around the room and placed a folder in each of their laps, standing firmly by the fireplace. I asked the room if anyone could name a single vacation where I had been treated like a guest instead of their maid. The room fell into a suffocating, heavy silence as they stared down at the itemized expenses. I looked directly at Beatrice and told them all that while I loved having family, I would never again tolerate being invisible in my own home. Scott quietly closed his folder, his face turning bright red, while Beatrice stared at her own photo in my kitchen. I did not wait around for their excuses. I simply drove back to my quiet apartment. Todd and I did not have a loud, dramatic blowout when I officially moved back home a few days later. Instead, we sat at the kitchen table over cold coffee, and he looked at me with a level of respect I hadn't seen in decades. He admitted the 2 weeks had been a nightmare, and he finally understood the immense burden I had carried. We established strict new boundaries. No more unannounced visits, absolute agreement from both of us beforehand, and mandatory division of labor for guests. A few weeks later, when Scott called asking to stay with us, I listened as Todd firmly told his brother no. I stood in the doorway, realizing my home was finally a place of mutual respect and peace.